Hi, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Making Sustainability Irresistible, Unlocking the Desirability Formula. My name is Jason Partridge, and I'm the VP Client Success at Lux Research, and also a co-founder from Lux Motive Base. I'll be moderating today's session. Presenting today is my colleague Ujwal Arkal-Good. He is the EVP and Group Director at Lux Research, and my co-founder at Lux Motive Base. Throughout this webinar, you can type any questions you have in the question box on your screen, and time permitting, we're going to try and answer as many of those as we can. But don't worry, if your question does not get answered, please don't hesitate to send us an email at questions@luxresearchinc.com. That's questions@luxresearchinc.com, and we will be sure to respond to you. At this point, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Ujwal, and we can get started.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, everybody. Super excited about this because this is sort of the never-ending challenge, if you will, that all of us face right now. We have immense pressure from our boards, from regulatory bodies, in order to push and solve for the issue of sustainability, and yet we don't have a solution to create the necessary demand in order to manage and deliver the business results that are desired with a lot of these sustainability initiatives. The biggest issue is almost everybody in every industry is taking a hit in terms of margins, and we're trying to figure out what is it that we can do to move away from the narrative where the consumer expects the corporation to bear the cost of sustainability. How do we move to a place where we create desirability, we create openness and an actual interest in wanting to actually, or create a willingness to pay a premium for a sustainable alternative? And that's really what this research is focused on. We spent many months looking at millions and millions of data points at a global scale to really try to understand what is the gap here? What is the desirability gap? What is the thing that is preventing the consumer, that is preventing people from being willing to bear at least a portion of the cost, from being willing to pay a premium for a sustainable alternative? And I'm going to jump right into it. And we'll start by defining the framework. We'll start on the left end with the common triggers, the column on the left. The common triggers references nothing but the most common ways in which brands, so consumer-facing brands and organizations today, go to market with sustainable alternatives at a global scale. What that implies is that this is the table stakes. Transparency, authenticity, innovation, ease of use, and reward. These are the most common ways in which brands today tell the consumer about their sustainability initiatives, about their sustainable alternatives. The reason it's table stakes is because it does not move the needle. While people may buy the sustainable alternative, it certainly does not create any kind of desire or any kind of openness to paying a premium. Next, we come to the column in the middle that we call differentiators. Now, turns out, while brands talk the language of transparency, authenticity, innovation, and so on, consumers talk an entirely different language. And this is not unsurprising. We see this a lot of the times in the research we do. Consumers use a bunch of other triggers in order to differentiate themselves from others within their peer groups. So differentiators are basically ways in which people tell the story to their peers about why they're buying a sustainable alternative. The stories revolve around triggers of design excellence or community endorsement or personal connection or potential for scale. And by the way, we will circulate this deck after the call, and it does have detailed definitions of each of these triggers. But I'll give you a couple of quick definitions just to bring you into this lens. What is community endorsement? Quite simply, a community that you belong to. There's somebody who's endorsing a particular product or a set of products. And this could be, as large as, let's say you belong to a community, an online community of new moms, and there's an endorsement for a particular type of solution for child rearing, all the way down to an endorsement from a celebrity or a influencer that you follow for various reasons. Design excellence, classic example. We've seen this in the marketplace quite a bit. Nowadays you can buy these really beautifully designed countertop green bins, so countertop bins that help you basically throw organic waste into. They look good on your countertop. They help you do good for the environment, and so on and so forth. and many other triggers. Health benefits, a very common one, especially in the food industry. We see various brands launching sustainable alternatives, but associating it with certain health benefits because there's obviously plenty of research talking about how the two go hand in hand. Efficiency, there's a lot of discussion about why the sustainable alternative also might be the more efficient alternative, and so on. So the definitions are fairly straightforward. There's nothing earth-shattering there, but the part that is earth-shattering, perhaps, is the fact that the triggers that are used by the brands are not the same as what's used by consumers, by people, when they talk about why they make sustainable choices with their peer groups. Now, here's the challenge. Neither do the common triggers nor do the differentiators create an openness to pay a premium. They create an openness to buying sustainable alternatives. So common triggers, by the way, don't even create that openness. Differentiators create the openness to buy a sustainable alternative. So differentiators help you differentiate your product. It helps the consumer differentiate their choices, gives them symbolic capital, and allows them to choose a sustainable alternative, but does not do enough to help them pay a premium. So what is missing? And therein lies the 4 missing concerns on the right end of this spectrum. Now, before I go into the missing concerns, let me just explain what they are and why you see a short-term to long-term scale above these 3 types of triggers. Turns out, and we've known this for a long time, by the way, turns out consumers need to feel a connection between their actions in the short term and the impact in the long term. Consumers need to feel a connection between their actions in the short term and impact in the long term. The problem is that just telling me that a decision I'm making helps future generations is too intangible for me. It doesn't help make that connection between my actions in the short term and impact in the long term. So it turns out missing concerns are 4 ways in which consumers are trying to, and they need your help, are trying to create a tangible connection between their actions in the short term and impact in the long term. So let's dive into that. So let's talk about what these missing concerns are. And we'll start with future promise, and we'll drill down into each of these. So future promise is very simple. It's the long-term cumulative benefits of today's actions in my daily life. It's the long-term cumulative benefit, but you need to see it in your daily life. And I'll give you some examples of that. But if you go back to that countertop green bin that's beautifully designed as an example, the whole purpose of that technology is that you can throw organic waste in and then use the resulting organic material in your garden. That's an example where the cumulative benefits of your actions you are seeing very tangibly, and in fact, you're taking it and using it as soil to plant things in your garden, as tangible as it gets, if you will. That's an example of future promise. Adaptive environments refers to this idea of being open to and wanting to modify my space so that it's greener or more open to future modifications. So again, a classic example of this would be an air purifier or diffusers, and a lot of these technologies that we bring into our home environment. We might be bringing them into our environment because we're replacing other traditional products that are less sustainable. We might also be bringing in some of these products because they help us create a certain environment within our interior space that feels better and improves our life. Another example of this might be, packaging, and certainly with the advent of the Home Edit and numerous other Netflix shows, this whole idea of being organized, especially around your kitchen, has become a big thing. Same with being organized around your pantry and your bathrooms and household essential items and so on and so forth. So suddenly, this has opened the space to some interesting innovations in the packaging landscape. That's an example where, on one hand, let's say I'm making this up, let's say somebody's buying environmentally sustainable packaging, but it also happens to be designed in a way that makes it very easy to organize and place. That's an example where the pack itself is solving a sustainability problem, but it's also helping you modify your space and make it a better space to live within. And that's what we call adaptive environments. So solutions that help make our homes more adaptive, make our workplaces more adaptive. Collective engagement is probably the simplest of the triggers or the missing concerns. It's about joining some sort of a community sustainability program and amplifying impact and making connections. And then liberation, very specifically, is attuned to this idea of needing services. This is not about products, it's about services. And the reason is this is about liberating me as a consumer from having to make the sustainable choice every single day or every single week when I'm shopping. I make it once and I forget about it. I set it and forget it. And certainly we're seeing examples of this with numerous subscription models across all kinds of industries these days. So ultimately, when we come back to the scale of, or this idea of wanting to connect my actions in the short term to impact in the long term, these are the 4 essential triggers that are missing for the consumer. So again, just a quick reminder or a quick recap of what we've discovered. We started talking, actually, I'll start here. We started talking about sort of the logical triggers that brands use. And again, there are definitions of these that you can look at in your leisure. But these are common triggers that brands use. And unfortunately, none of these triggers actually even make the consumer buy sustainable alternatives. Then we come to the differentiators. These are things that create symbolic capital. These are triggers that consumers use to talk about why they're making sustainable choices. At least it helps people make sustainable choices, but it does not solve the problem, does not create the willingness to pay a premium. And this is what brings us ultimately to this idea of the missing requirements, which is ultimately the missing piece of the puzzle, if you will. So how do we put this together? And by the way, I'll take you through an example of how you can use this to actually drive action internally and how you think about bringing different sustainable initiatives to life. So I'll go into a couple of these examples in a second. But let's jump to our flow chart, because when we then take this model and think about how we put the sustainability framework into action, the desirability framework into action, it involves a bunch of pretty simple steps. So let's go through these steps, and then we're going to take 2 examples where we actually apply these steps to arrive at interesting outcomes, just as a way to illustrate how this framework can be an incredible tool for creativity, an incredible tool to allow us to get outside of our own heads and outside of our own predefined frameworks to start to think about solving the problem of sustainability through a purely human-centered lens and through the lens of really creating this openness and this desire for premium. So you start with, like you start with every project, you start with a goal. You define an objective, you have an insight. I don't need to tell you how to do that. All of you have that. And then the work begins. You begin by defining a common trigger in your industry. This is quite easy. No matter what industry you're in, there will already be some common ways in which your competitors talk about sustainability. Those are the common triggers. So begin by defining what the most common trigger is. Remember that the common trigger is just a way for you to ground yourself. It's not going to create any kind of action on part of the consumer. Then you come on to the differentiator. It's important to remember that the differentiator is a way in which consumers differentiate themselves with each other. It helps the consumer make the sustainable choice. So identify the differentiator that you think you can live up to. So for example, let's say you're a snack bar. The most common trigger in the industry is about transparency of ingredients. You come to the differentiator and you go, okay, the differentiator that we know we can own, given our brand and our history, is of health benefits. So that's an example where you pick a differentiator that you know you can own, okay? Then you come on to the missing concerns in orange, the box in orange. This is perhaps the most critical one, because at this point, you've identified the common trigger, you've identified the differentiator, you've created the desire to buy a sustainable alternative, but you're yet to create the desire to pay a premium for it. This is where the missing concern comes in. So leveraging your knowledge of your category or your industry, start with one missing concern and take these 3 elements into a creative brainstorming exercise. Facilitate the discussion with your internal teams and envision different solutions. Then come back, rinse and repeat with other missing concerns. You can even take combinations of missing concerns just to make life interesting if you would like. So I'm going to demonstrate to you now how our team applied this desirability framework internally in 2 sample use cases in order to just illustrate to you what a powerful tool this can be for creativity, to drive action, and to really help your teams or get your teams out of their own internal constraints or predefined constraints, if you will. And I can see some questions coming in, and do not worry, at the end of my session here, Jason will help me moderate, and we'll take some of your questions. So let's talk about applying the desirability formula, and we're going to take the example of wipes. So let's imagine that we're a brand, we sell wipes, we've already made our wipes eco-friendly, perhaps we're even working on making them biodegradable, but we're struggling to get people to pay a premium for it. It's certainly flying off the shelf. We're doing a good job of getting it out, but we're struggling to make people pay a premium. It's still, sometimes it's even selling at a discount. So how do we solve that problem? What's the insight? We already know that consumers are increasingly seeking natural cleaning products. We know that they want to minimize their harm to their health, and they want to minimize harm to the environment. So we know these motivations exist, but we still have to solve this problem. So what do? We begin by first defining the most common trigger in the industry. We pick transparency because it turns out most of our competitors in the industry are also talking about transparency in terms of, maybe they're getting third-party certifications and things like that. Then we pick design excellence as our differentiator because we know that design-wise, it is something that we really stand out with. Our brand, our history as an organization lends itself really well to excel at incredible design and aesthetic. So we create a product, or we know we can create a product that has great aesthetic appeal, that sets it apart from conventional and other eco-friendly alternatives. And then we have to pick a missing concern. So let's imagine that we pick the missing concern of future promise. So how can we solve this problem by picking the missing concern of future promise? So just a reminder, what is future promise? It's seeing the long-term cumulative benefits of today's actions in your daily life. So how could we do that? We take that into a brainstorming session. One of the ideas, just as an example, that our team came up with is imagine the beautifully designed wipes container. And of course, it's made of recycled or recyclable materials. The wipes are biodegradable, but it has two containers or two sections or two compartments rather. The first compartment is where you extract the wipe, you use it. The second compartment is where you dispose off of the wipe. Perhaps the second compartment has certain key technologies in there, perhaps certain types of enzymes and things like that help break down the wipe. And the second compartment happens to be transparent, so I can see the breakdown happening. So over the course of, let's say, 3 to 4 weeks, as I use that box of wipes, I can also see the live impact of disposing the wipe in the second container. So that container slowly, obviously it's not going to completely decompose the wipes, but it slowly starts to break down some of the wipes. Even a little bit is powerful because I, as a consumer now, can see tangibly the impact that my actions are making. At the end of that period, it's recommended that you then empty that into your green bin for organic disposal, and you're done. And you throw the other in recycling, and you're done. Just as an example, this is an example of a solution that comes out of simply taking future promise along with the other two triggers into a creative brainstorming exercise and letting our team forget about the internal organizational technological constraints we often put ourselves into, but rather just to put ourselves through the lens of the consumer and try to create ideas and solutions, and then figure out, let's say you end up with 20 solutions, which, by the way, one of our clients recently who did this exercise with us ended up with about 22 different solutions in a span of an hour and a half session. They then took those 22 solutions and distilled it down to 3 that they know they can have a critical impact on. They've got technologies and they've got partners and ways to operationalize. Okay, let's take another example. And this time we're going to take the example in the food industry. Let's imagine we've got a snack bar. We've got to make it sustainable. Our objective is to really revamp this snack bar so it stands out as the leading sustainable choice for eco and health conscious snackers. The insight is we know that consumers are increasingly showing a preference for tasty, healthy, and natural ingredients. And in fact, consumers are increasingly believing that natural ingredients also just taste better. So we have this insight. We've got to solve this problem. Let's go. So again, we begin by first defining the most common trigger in our industry. Turns out it's ease of use. It's about convenience in the snack bar industry. Okay, nothing surprising there. We then look at all the various differentiators we've got. We decide, okay, as a snack bar company, we think we can really excel at health benefits first and foremost. So we pick health benefits because we know we've got technology and we've got a brand that can really stand behind this idea. We then come on to the missing concerns, and this time, to make it interesting, we pick two missing concerns of future promise and collective engagement, and we go into a creative brainstorming exercise. One of the first ideas our team comes up with is this idea of creating a package that is not only biodegradable, but let's say has some kind of a seed planted in it, so that it becomes a fun exercise that you do, perhaps even do with your kids, because after you eat the snack bar, you plant it. And over weeks and months, the seedling germinates and you have a plant, and you can literally tangibly see the impact. Perhaps you create a really interesting social engagement program around it to create collective engagement so that people can actually contribute, share photos, and contribute and be part of the conversation and be part of the a broader vision, let's say, that you're defining for your brand, and you let consumers help you co-create it. So that's one of the examples of an idea that came out. Again, all these technologies obviously already exist. We've had biodegradable wrappers for a while. We've got technologies in terms of being able to plant the wrapper to let it germinate and things like that. So nothing earth-shattering here, but the whole point being it's the combination of these three that really creates the desire for premiumization. And that's the problem ultimately that we're solving for the consumer. So coming back and bringing it all back together to the simple desirability framework, this is the power of this formula, right? It's a simple 5-step process. And you're already, by the way, doing 2 or 3 out of these 5 steps. It's about giving this the structure you need so that you apply a human-centered lens and then take that into your creative brainstorming sessions so that you can come up with ideas and solutions that are not restrictive even before you've come up with them, if you will. So it really pushes us out of our comfort zone. It gets us out of groupthink, and it gets us to reimagine opportunities that previously we may have just completely missed. So what are the key takeaways, or what are the things I'd like to leave you with? It's really important to go beyond logical triggers. Missing concerns and emerging differentiators are key. It's really important to identify the right mix of the common industry triggers, the missing concerns and differentiators, because the right mix is what gives you the creative playing field. In fact, Jason, who's moderating today, used to be a creative director back in the day. And I remember when I first met him, one of the first things he would tell me is the best creative ideas come when you clearly define your sandbox. And everything goes wrong when your sandbox is haphazardly defined or defined without clear guardrails. And this is the power of the desirability framework. And of course, we want you to be able to envision creative solutions that really bring these missing concerns to life and really help you take your sustainable solutions to the next level. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Uj. We do have a couple of questions that have presented themselves. First and foremost, we could do an entire seminar on this question, so please keep it in a sandbox. Can you talk a little bit about how you identified these triggers and these differentiators and the missing concerns? What was the research that kind of fed into us getting to these specific, very clear, tactical kind of ways that we can be thinking about sustainability?
Absolutely. Great question. So the approach to the research, and let me go back to the framework. The approach to research, common triggers came out of examining the language. So for those of you who may not know what we do within predictive anthropology at Lux, we study language in context in order to decode meaning. So when we talk about anthropology, we talk about looking at the naturally bubbling language within the context of sustainability. Because when you look at how people, and when I say people, I mean millions and millions of people, this is scaled research, are just naturally talking about something, you start to see naturally forming clusters. And these clusters teach us about how people give meaning to the idea of sustainability, and specifically to the idea of being willing to pay a premium. Now, what we did was we broke up our exercise into 2 parts. One, looking at language coming from brands, and that led to the discovery of common triggers. So we looked at millions and millions of data points of language coming from brands and identified 5 common triggers. The second part was looking at language coming from consumers in the context of sustainable alternatives, which led us to arriving at differentiators. The third part was looking at language from consumers in the context of premiumization and sustainability, and that led us to missing concerns. So it's as simple as that. Everything was about studying the natural structure of language to extract the naturally forming themes that shape human understanding.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Somebody had very keen ears on the call, and they heard you use the term symbolic capital. So the question was, can you just talk a little bit more about what you mean and what we mean by symbolic capital? And secondly, is there a reason why this kind of presents itself amongst the differentiators?
Yeah, great question. So symbolic capital, fundamentally, a sociological term. I think it was Pierre Bourdieu that originally coined it, or perhaps recoined it. But it really alludes to this idea that we don't just exchange currency literally in the form of money in our economy, in our culture, society. We also exchange currency symbolically in our culture and society. And that symbolic exchange is or happens when we exchange ideas, when we learn about new things from each other, when we pressure each other to consider new habits, new rituals. All of these things give birth to the exchange of capital that is symbolic in nature. So it's not literal money, it's the money of ideas, it's the wealth of ideas. Now, classic example of this is you're at a dinner table or at a party with your friends, and you talk about a product you use, and your friend makes a snarky comment about that brand, saying, you know how bad they are in terms of their environmental footprint, and tells a story. And then they immediately say, oh, I'm so sorry, Ujwal, for making you, I hope I didn't make you feel bad about that. It just came to my mind, and sometimes I don't have a filter. And they laugh it off. But you leave that dinner party feeling ashamed. You go home, and I'm being dramatic, you throw out all those products in your pantry and you replace them with the better products. What's happened here? You were exposed to a new form of symbolic currency and you went, I must acquire that. Why? Because as human beings, we constantly want betterment. We never want to stagnate, and that's why symbolic capital is so powerful. Differentiators are a form of symbolic capital that help us justify why we're buying sustainable alternatives. Missing concerns are also a form of symbolic capital, but they justify why we're willing to pay a premium. That's the difference.
Amazing. There's a couple more questions that are kind of sitting in here. There's one I do want to just focus on. If we don't get to any of the additional questions, please note that we'll reach out in order to try and answer them for you. And once again, I presented the email for asking questions at the beginning of the presentation. So we're going to end on this one, Ujwal. But I thought this was just really, really interesting. The question was, how much flexibility is there, and can you in some way reverse engineer the process? So for example, let's say that you identify your common trigger and you identify your differentiator. You go into a brainstorming kind of environment around future promise, but you feel like things are not fitting as perfectly as you want them to. Can you go and can you choose one of the other missing concerns and then kind of replicate the process?
Absolutely. The idea behind the flowchart is not to make this rigid. It is to basically give you a framework with which you can iterate, right? So when our clients use it, they'll go and do one iteration with one missing concern. And actually the way we structured and recommended it to one of our clients was in a 90-minute session, do 3 30-minute sessions with 3 different missing concerns and see where you land up. You might end up with 20, 30 ideas, but it's a good starting point to then distill them down. The other thing I just wanted to mention is one of the questions related to examples in market of brands and companies that are doing this really well. And believe it or not, it's actually quite hard to find perfect examples outside of Tesla. I think Tesla is probably the most obvious example because you don't have to go to the gas station, you're spending less in terms of maintenance costs, and it's a very tangible impact of making a sustainable choice on your day-to-day life. But there are a couple of others. EC30, that's a toilet cleaning solution from P&G. Great example because not only is it a novel format and packaging, much cleaner cleaning experience, but it's also an innovative product experience because it foams, it self-dissolves, and it's also a subscription. So that one hits both on future promise and on liberation. as the missing
example.
concerns, and in fact sells at a premium. Another example would be Alter Eco Foods, because they have a truly compostable candy wrapper. So for example, their claim to fame is that it is in fact backyard compostable. That's the tangibility element of it, because normally when we think about compost, we think it's got to go into our system, into our garbage system. But backyard compostable is different. So that's another way where future promise is made very tangible. And there are some notable mentions, like there's the floor down fiber from Pangea, I think Pangaia, Pangea. It's an interesting apparel brand. Not fully there, but they're trying to get there. The tangibility is not fully clear, but it's starting to get there. And what I mean by that is, for example, their fabric actually shifts. The consumer says the fabric actually shifts and changes in color because it's natural. As you use it, it reacts with your body and it actually changes with color. So there's a tangibility to feeling like you're making a sustainable choice, literally in a sweatshirt you're wearing, which is very interesting. So there's some that are cropping up and they're achieving the success that you might hope in terms of offering products at a premium. But honestly, you will be hard pressed to find perfect examples. This is why we believe this framework is so powerful. There's just so much opportunity. Yeah,
so important. Amazing. Well, Ujjwal, thank you very, very much. That is going to conclude our webinar for today. The slide presentation and recording from this webinar will be sent to all attendees via email later on today. One small request is after leaving the webinar, you're going to get prompted to complete a little survey on the presentation, and we'd really appreciate any feedback you may have as it helps to inform and improve all of our future webinars. Speaking of future webinars, Ujjwal was kind enough to pull this up onto the screen, so please take a moment to check them out, and we really, really appreciate everybody joining us today. Thank you very much.